Do apologize for that technical glitch over there, but of course we are still engaging Orrin Singh, the senior reporter at Eyewitness News in South Africa, to discuss the recent voting day and its outcomes. Now, as the country continues to navigate its complexities of democracy, we will delve into the sentiments of the electorate, the voting results, and any other related matters that may have emerged from this significant event. Very good evening, Singh. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Good evening to your viewers.
Now, thank you so much for joining us. Talk to us about, the overall mood among the electorate on voting day yesterday. Were there any notable trends or patterns in the way that people approached the polls?
There were some notable trends. There were various issues that arose in some of the suburban areas within the country. A number of notable cities being Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, are three major cities, in fact, where a lot of people were not able to cast their votes due to a technical glitch by the Independent Electoral Commission. And that resulted in the IEC having to revert to capture votes manually from the electronic system. And this actually ended up meaning that hundreds of people who had been in these queues for between 5 and 6 hours were unable to vote and cast their vote by the 9 p.m. cutoff time. And so this kind of forced the IEC to make a decision quite late yesterday around 7 p.m. or a little bit earlier than that, around 5 p.m. to say that those that are in the line have to be afforded the opportunity to cast their votes. And anyone who joins the line after 9 p.m. should be blocked and not allowed to, because that was technically the cutoff time. So we saw some voters across the country standing in queues up till the early hours of this morning, bearing the cold and the weather conditions just to be afforded the opportunity to go and mark their X and vote. And there's been a lot of pressure on the IEC to provide more reasons as to what went wrong yesterday, which we haven't got all the answers to yet. But I'm sure in the coming days, after the elections wrap up and once all the votes have been captured and counted and the results have been presented to South Africans, we will be able to get more answers as to what actually happened yesterday. That it's the first sort of incident that we've had like this in the country, and we need answers as to what actually happened.
Saying there was a social media trend encouraging young South Africans to not vote at all during these elections. Did they indeed shy away from the voting stations, or were the youth represented in numbers?
So it's quite difficult to ascertain the sort of population or the age of people who voted. I can speak from my specific experience being on the field yesterday. We were out in Nkandla, where the former president and now party leader of the newly formed MK party, Jacob Zuma, cast his vote, and we saw quite a bit of young people, despite that region being home to a lot of elderly people. But I think across the board, across the country, building up to elections, and my team and myself, who have traveled to various provinces across the country to sort of garner the views and thoughts of South Africans building up to this election, there is a sentiment that the youth have lost faith in government, not only the ruling party, the African National Congress, but in the whole sort of belief and system of a government itself. And they feel that some of the people that we spoke to feel that they don't feel that whether they vote or not, it's going to make a difference. And I think that speaks to the broader sort of picture of politics within South Africa being so dynamic in this democracy that it doesn't filter down to the ground. When the young people listen to politicians speaking, listen to mayors and MECs and so forth, it's not filtering down to the ground, and it's not being brought to them in reality in the way that it's meant to be done. And so there are probably millions of South Africans. There is, for a fact, millions of South Africans who have not voted. And I won't be surprised if the majority of those millions are young South Africans.
Very well. Now, what are the preliminary voting results indicating so far? And are there any surprises or unexpected outcomes that have caught your attention as a journalist?
I think the main surprise, and this is the main surprise for analysts, political analysts, journalists, anchors, and so forth across the country and the world, is the emergence of the MK party and how well they've done so far. We've still got a little bit a way to go until we get the final results. And we're not 100% sure if the stats that we're being presented with currently reflect actual numbers of votes that have been counted. Because remember, once votes are captured at a voting polling station, they get sent through a number of processes and audits before they can actually officially be labeled as a counted vote. So the votes as it stands, we've got the ANC leading on a national level, not talking provincial and regional or national assembly, at 42.5%, followed by the DA, the official opposition party, at 25.1%. The MK party, who were formed earlier this year, and the former president, Jacob Zuma, revealing that he was going to be at the helm of that party, are doing reasonably well at 8.6%. And that's just behind the EFF, the Economic Freedom Front, under Julius Malema, who had 9%. So, building up to this election, everyone knew that the MK had a good chance of knocking off votes or stealing votes from the ANC. But I think coming into the election, what analysts have kind of figured and what analysts have kind of worked out is that the MK party has, where they may well have taken some of the ANC voters and even IFP voters, they've really put a knock on the EFF. And that was something interesting that we're looking at right now. But it's still very early days. We still have to see how things go. A lot of the suburban areas in the country, the cities, those votes have not been counted or captured properly as of yet to reflect in this national overview of the stats that we're getting live as I talk to you now.
Very well. And how do you think the voting results will impact the political landscapes of South Africa in the coming months or years?
It's going to have a major political impact. For the first time, we might not see the ANC, the African National Congress, who have ruled in South Africa for the past 30 years, win in an outright majority at a national level. The ANC have lost powers of certain metros. Even the city of Johannesburg is currently under a coalition. But at a national level, the picture being painted before our eyes is looking very bleak for the African National Congress going forward. It looks like what might happen is that the ANC is going to have to go into a coalition, and whether they had prepared for that or whether they were banking on South Africans going out and casting their votes in support of them is unclear yet. We're not sure if the ANC have adequately prepared and held talks prior to this election as to who they would approach and go to into a coalition with. We know that the EFF are front runners to probably team up with the ANC, but the other small parties will also have a sort of tale to tell when it comes to some of these coalitions that the ANC will most likely have to get into. So for the first time in South Africa's democracy, we're not going to have, most likely, an outright winner for the national elections.
Going to be a very interesting result to look out for. But you mentioned technical difficulties at the polls, that being that of the electoral at the polls. But what are some of the other key issues that voters were most concerned about when casting their ballots? Were there any specific policy areas that dominated the conversation?
I think, South Africans in general are tired of the same rhetoric that we've come to hear from politicians. And I'm not just talking about the ANC in this regard. I think there's this general feel about politicians in this country, and not only this country, but across the world, and what they feed to citizens and what their intentions are and what they produce at the end of the day. So the political landscape, as broad as it is in South Africa, is a very difficult one and a complex one to understand and to get right. And when it comes to policies and manifestos, every party has a different sort of stance on what they want to bring to the fore, what they want to assist. But I think in terms of the one area that is covered in a lot of these policies and manifestos that the parties have launched is the main concern of unemployment and youth unemployment. We have a major youth unemployment problem in this country. And the issue doesn't just boil down to people leaving high school and not being able to secure jobs. It comes down to graduates sitting at home with degrees and diplomas, unable to get jobs in this country. And for any country, that's a major issue. That's a major concern, because that has direct implications on your economy.
Yeah.
It has direct implications on foreign lending and foreign direct investment and how you are rated by some of these rating associations. So in terms of the political landscape and in terms of some of the issues that were covered in many of these policies launched by these various political parties, youth unemployment is a main concern. And I think that's the one thing that a lot of political parties want to address, but whether they are going to address that after they're elected into power is yet to be seen.
Very well. Let's talk about what's happening in the media currently. How do you think the media coverage of the election has influenced public opinion and the overall outcome of the elections thus far?
The media has a very good relationship in South Africa with the Independent Electoral Commission. Prior to any election, the media are always having training, building up to election as to what we should be reporting on, what is the important thing to look out for, how to understand the ballot papers, bearing in mind that for the first time in South Africa's history, we had 3 different papers that you needed to cast your vote for this year, 3 ballots. And so that was the first time for many South Africans. There was a lot of confusion, and that's why both prior to the election, we had to, as the media, get into talks with the IEC and say, okay, this is the first process that many South Africans are going to be going through for the first time since 1994. And how do we inform our citizens of what is the correct thing that they should know and where they should mark their X, and what does the national versus provincial versus the regional National Assembly ballot mean, and what does that translate to in terms of who is given powers in which sort of sphere. So there is a very good relationship in terms of the media, and the media has with the Independent Electoral Commission, although it's not a relationship that should be confused for anything as in showing them bias. At the end of the day, the media in South Africa, we know, are one of the most free media in the world and are allowed to cover things that many media throughout the world aren't. And should the IEC at any level drop the ball, which they did yesterday, but that may not have been their fault. We do know that budget cuts have really affected the IEC and the way they've been run in the past. And so that's something that we're going to have to look at going forward. But should there be anyone, anybody, any politician or anyone that needs to be held accountable, the media in South Africa you can bet sure, will do that.
All right. Now, generally, as per any elections that happened, worldwide, we do often see, potential challenges or controversies that may arise from any election results. Do you think this is also likely to be a case for South African elections at the moment?
I think there are going to be challenges after the elections, and we're not talking weeks after. We're talking a couple of days after results are released. Being a democratic society, and one that really looks to the law when they need to resolve things in this country, in most instances. A lot of the political parties I can see challenging some of the results, a lot of the political parties challenging some of the allegations that may arise in terms of interference in voting processes, or in terms of whether certain voters who waited in those long queues weren't able to cast their votes and got tired and ended up leaving, and how does that translate into how many people were registered to vote versus how many people have voted? Because that's a question that the INC are really not giving us answers to at the moment. How many registered voters we have, and how many people actually voted yesterday? How many people were not turned away from the voting stations but got fed up after standing for 4 hours in a voting line? And how does that translate into the final results? So I can definitely see a number of court cases arising after the elections by various political parties who might well want answers to some of the pertinent questions that we as journalists in this country have want answers to as well.
Absolutely. Well, Orrin, thank you so much for making the time to give us this general understanding of the election so far. Of course, we wish to have you again just to give you, to rather give us a rather wrap from what has happened or what erupted from the elections. Thank you so much, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
All right, that was Orrin Singh, a senior reporter at Eyewitness News, joining us all the way from Ulundi in northern KZN in South Africa, just giving us an understanding of the recent voting day and, of course, the outcomes thus far. We have more